Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. A man and a woman from Israel's embassy are shot dead outside a Gaza-focused event in downtown Washington, D.C. Police say the suspect shouted "Free Palestine" and is being probed for possible terror links. Israel calls it a shocking terrorist attack. US President Donald Trump accuses South Africa of white genocide and land seizures, claims widely rejected as false and radicalized. President Ramaphosa tries to repair ties in DC amid aid cuts, diplomatic rifts and support from billionaire Rupert Black home. Israel says 100 trucks crossed into Gaza, but the UN reports no aid has reached those in need amid distribution breakdowns. Netanyahu offers a ceasefire for hostage deals, yet vows to press on with plans to take full control of Gaza. Pyongyang launches multiple cruise missiles, South Korea confirms, with details under review by Seoul and Washington. The latest test adds to growing tensions as intelligence officials analyse the launch trajectories and intent. Torrential rains trigger deadly floods in New South Wales, leaving 2 dead and nearly 50,000 stranded. Premier Chris Minns warns the worst may yet come, calling it a terrible disaster for the region. G7 finance ministers meet in Canada to avoid a repeat of 2018's G6+1 split and find common ground on global challenges. While divisions remain over Ukraine and Russia, leaders stress progress on economic crimes, China policy and forum unity. Moscow says it's intercepted 105 Ukrainian drones, including dozens targeting the capital, as frontline fighting intensifies. This comes amid global talks on how to end Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II. The Sean Diddy Coombs trial continues, with psychologist Dawn Hughes educating jurors on trauma and abuse, while ex-aide George Kaplan takes the stand. Rapper Kid Cudi is expected to testify today as the high-profile case builds momentum. 2 Israeli embassy staff members were killed near a Jewish museum in Washington on Wednesday night, according to US Homeland Security Chief Kristi Noem. As per the officials, a suspect is currently in custody. Tal Noem Cohen, a spokesperson for the Israeli embassy, said in a statement that the 2 staff members were shot at close range while attending a Jewish event at the museum. Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, has called the shooting a depraved act of anti-Semitic terrorism. The Israeli ambassador to the US, Yachael Leiter, also shared that 2 staff members were a young couple about to be engaged. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reportedly said that he was shocked by the anti-Semitic murder and that security will be stepped up at Israeli embassies around the world. Metropolitan Police Department Chief Pamela Smith has stated that prior to the shooting, the suspect was observed pacing back and forth outside the museum before he approached a group of 4 people, produced a handgun and opened fire, striking both staff members. The suspect then entered the museum and was detained by event security. He continued to chant "Free Palestine" while in custody. The US President Donald Trump has expressed his condolences for the families of the victims and said that hatred and radicalism have no place in the United States. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that this was an act of cowardly anti-Semitic violence and that authorities would track down those responsible for the fatal shooting. Let's listen in to what the Israeli ambassador and the mayor of Washington had to say about the incident.
The couple that was gunned down tonight in the name of Free Palestine is a young couple about to be engaged. The young man purchased a ring this week with the intention of proposing to his girlfriend next week in Jerusalem. Together with President Trump, our Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, will stand together tall and firm, and we will confront this moral depravity without fear and with determination. And now we'll turn to taking care of the families.
What I do know is that the horrific incident is going to frighten a lot of people in our city and in our country. And I want to be clear that we will not tolerate this violence or hate in our city. We will not tolerate any acts of terrorism, and we're going to stand together as a community in the coming days and weeks to send the clear message that we will not tolerate anti.
We're now joined by Peter Baum, who's the foreign editor of the Weekly Blitz, to discuss this in further detail. Peter, thank you very much for joining us. This was a sudden and an unprecedented event that happened today, shocking. I wanted to get your initial reaction to this. 2 people killed outside, 2 Israeli embassy workers killed in Washington, D.C.
Yes, it's obviously one of shock, but I must say of no surprise. Since the October 7th and all the protests and negative media coverage on Israel, acts of anti-Semitism have increased beyond any scale imaginable in major cities of Western democracies. And whether it's London, where we have a very weak mayor, and I must say a very pro-Palestinian mayor, or whether it's Toronto or whether it's cities in Australia, we have seen despicable acts of violence against Jewish organisations, Jewish individuals. And I think this killing in Washington is just an extension of what's been happening over the last 20 months in our major Western cities, where I'm afraid to say politicians and mayors, and let's not forget that Mayor Muriel Bowser in Washington is a very left-wing mayor, Washington being a sanctuary city, and I'm afraid, as I said, this is one of shock but not one of surprise. What is surprising, however, is that given where the event was held, and ironically, I understand it was, although it was held at the Jewish Museum, it was an interfaith meeting. There were many people of non-Jews there, and it just so happens by chance, as we think, the young couple who were killed were both Israeli members of the Israeli staff. But I think this, what is surprising is the security around this particular event seems to have been less than it should have been, given the city, given the event, and given the place where it was being held. So I think that will have to be looked at. But again, as I say, one of shock but of no surprise.
Yes, and this is, as you've said previously, a string of anti-Semitic, reportedly anti-Semitic events that have happened since this war has started. I just want you to say how people should react to this. Should there be heightened security at these embassies? Should Israelis who are going out now be concerned about something like this happening? Australia, we've seen a real rise in anti-Semitism, as well as across Europe, and now the United States as well. Can I get your thoughts?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Again, I'm surprised that I would have thought that certainly around Israeli embassies, security was at its ultimate. This was not an embassy, it was a Jewish museum, but clearly synagogues, Jewish organisations, Jewish buildings where there are pro-Israel activists, pro-Israeli events going on, must indeed heighten security. It would be devastating if such events were cancelled, because that would have been given into terrorism. I think what Jewish people, what most morally decent people are concerned about globally, is the inertia with which politicians playing to, let's face it, a radical left-wing and Islamic mob supported by a media which is very, very hostile to the Jewish state of Israel, have all combined to bring us to the situation where we are today, and this tragic shooting of a young couple doing nothing more than attending, as I say, what I think seems to be an interfaith event. The latest information we have is that the individual who is currently in custody doesn't seem to be part of a wider terrorist network, but that's early stage information, and when it's investigated more fully, it could be that he was a member and was radicalized by groups hostile to Israel. But clearly, I think the world's media and politicians who have caved in to these mobs on our streets shouting "Globalise the Intifada," and let's not mistake this. This is what "Globalise the Intifada" means.
Peter,
it means hostile acts towards Jews, with the ultimate aim of eliminating the Jewish state of Israel.
Peter,
I
apologies, we are running out of time. I just want to get this final question in. The chief suspect is a man called Elias Rodriguez. Police say that he shouted "Free Palestine" during the time of the attack. Some critics are saying that escalating tensions over the Gaza war are spilling over into the diaspora. What your response to claims that Israeli policies are increasing the threat environment abroad for Jews around the world?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting and pertinent question. And the only way I can answer that is with a question. You see, when, for example, Assad of Syria was slaughtering 600,000 Syrians, or when the Houthis in Yemen were slaughtering Yemenis, or when the Turks were bombing Kurds, we didn't see the marches, the protests, the anti-Syrian, anti-Yemeni, anti-Turkish media coverage, and therefore we didn't see any protests and we didn't see any marches. But when it comes to the Jewish state of Israel, Israel to the world at large is treated very, very differently. And I put it to you that it doesn't take much for the Jewish state of Israel to act how the world sees inappropriately before we see acts against Jews globally. We see nothing of the kind. We don't see any kind of anti-Islamic acts when totalitarian Islamic states like the Taliban, for example, start taking away women's rights, where Iraq, for example, start lowering the age of consent to 9 years old. So for Muslim states to act inappropriately, we don't see any hostility globally, quite rightly, in my opinion.
There is Islamophobia as well. Let's not distract from that.
Then that gives the excuse for anti-Semitism globally, and it's just an excuse about the Israeli government policy. It wouldn't matter what the policy was, there would still be this hostility towards Jews globally. And that's very, very concerning, very upsetting, and it seems like we haven't learned anything over the last 3,000 years.
Peter Bourne, thank you very much for your insight in joining us on the programme. We now move on to some more news coming from the Middle East. Israel says 100 UN and international aid trucks have entered Gaza via the Karim Shalom crossing point, according to Kojat, the Defence Ministry unit overseeing Palestinian civil affairs. All aid was inspected before entry. This comes as Netanyahu says it was necessary to avoid a humanitarian crisis in order to preserve Israel's freedom of operational action in Gaza. He also stated that all of the Gaza Strip will be under the Israeli army's control by the end of its ongoing intensified offensive in the Palestinian territory. Moreover, the Israeli Prime Minister said that he was ready for a temporary ceasefire to secure the return of hostages held in Gaza, adding 20 of them were certainly alive and up to 38 of them are deceased. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has voiced guarded optimism for a solution to end the Gaza war. According to reports, at least 93 people have been killed in Israeli attacks across the Gaza Strip since dawn on May the 21st. On the other hand, the Israeli military has reported that it intercepted a missile fired from the Gaza Strip. No reports of injuries or damage have been reported so far. In a related development, more than a dozen countries have condemned Israel after its forces fired near a convoy of foreign diplomats visiting the Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. The diplomats, who included officials from the EU, UK, China, Russia and several other nations, were part of a coordinated visit to assess the humanitarian situation in the area. Israel said troops were fired warning shots after the group deviated from a pre-agreed route, though diplomats dispute this, saying no clear warning was issued. While no one was hurt, global reaction has been swift. European powers, including France, Germany and the United Kingdom, have summoned Israeli ambassadors and demanded explanations. Canada called the incident totally unacceptable, and countries like Ireland, Turkey and Egypt accuse Israel of violating diplomatic norms and international law. Many cited the Vienna Convention, which guarantees the safety of diplomatic personnel. Norway, Portugal and Mexico emphasised that firing near clearly marked diplomatic convoys is a grave breach of that treaty. The Palestinian Authority called the act a heinous crime and said the diplomats were there to witness the aftermath of Israeli military operations in Jenin. Since January, Israeli forces have been conducting a major crackdown in the West Bank, which the UN says has displaced tens of thousands of people and left over 100 Palestinians dead. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Israel's military has crushed refugee camps in the occupied West Bank. On the other hand, the Israeli military expressed regret for the inconvenience, but the fallout continues to escalate. Leaders around the world are now calling for a thorough investigation and accountability, warning that any harm to diplomats undermines international order. We now move over to the United States, where in a tense White House meeting, US President Donald Trump confronted South African President Cyril Ramaphosa with discredited claims of a so-called white genocide. Trump played a video alleging White House farmers are being killed and forced to flee South Africa. Ramaphosa firmly denied these accusations, stating South Africa does not support land seizures from white farmers and the government condemns violence of any kind. Trump, undeterred, said he wanted an explanation of the farmer situation, but Ramaphosa stood firm, pointing to democracy and diverse voices in South Africa, while urging Trump to listen to facts and not fiction. Despite the surprise ambush, Ramaphosa called the meeting very good and used the opportunity to push for a reset in US-South Africa relations. He stressed the importance of trade, investment and job creation to tackle poverty and crime. Ramaphosa also invited Trump to visit South Africa to continue discussing the tariffs and critical minerals. Let's now turn to Europe, where Ukraine will ask the European Union next week to adopt tougher sanctions on Russia amid growing uncertainty over Washington's commitment to the pressure campaign. Reportedly, according to a 40-page white paper, Kyiv will call on the EU to take bolder steps, including seizing Russian assets and imposing secondary sanctions on countries that continue to buy Russian oil. The move comes as US President Donald Trump has pulled back from imposing fresh sanctions after speaking with President Putin earlier this week. Now, in a related development, Russia says it shot down over 100 Ukrainian drones earlier today, including 35 headed towards the Russian capital. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed its forces intercepted 105 drones across multiple regions between midnight and dawn, part of what appears to be an intensifying drone offensive. Moscow's mayor confirmed several drones were intercepted en route to the capital. The incident comes a day after Russia reported shooting down over 300 drones in a similar barrage. Let's now move over to the Indo-Pacific, where an all-party delegation led by JDU MP Sanjay Kumar Jha arrived early in Tokyo earlier today. The visit is part of a 5-nation anti-terror outreach. The delegation includes MPs from the BJP, CPIM and TMC. Their goal, to present India's firm stance against terrorism after April's deadly Pahalgam terror attack. The group will visit Japan, Indonesia, Malaysia, South Korea and Singapore. While they're there, they'll brief leaders on Operation Sindoor, launched in response to the Pahalgam strike. Sanjay Jha said the mission is to expose Pakistan's state-backed terrorism and India's decisive military response under Operation Sindoor. Jha emphasised that Pakistan's entire system supports terrorism. We want the world to know the truth and call out Pakistan's nuclear bluff, he said. BJP MP Amapara Sarangi called the outreach a clear message to the world. She praised the Modi government's strategy of sending multiple delegations abroad. The CPIM's John Britters said the bipartisan nature of the delegation shows India's national unity against terrorism in all forms. The message is one of zero tolerance. India says it will no longer accept cross-border terrorism as business as usual. Under Operation Sindoor, India launched targeted strikes on terror camps in Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. It also hit back at Pakistani aggression. Both nations halted military action after a hotline call between their DGMOs, but India's message remained firm. Enough is enough. Now we move back to the Middle East, where Israel's Supreme Court has ruled that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's decision to fire Domestic Security Chief Ronan Bar was in fact unlawful. In a sharp rebuke to the government, the court found that Barr's dismissal was carried out through an improper and illegal process, lacking both a factual basis and a formal hearing. The ruling marks the latest escalation in a growing power struggle between Netanyahu and Israel's judiciary. The court also highlighted a conflict of interest, noting that the Shin Bet under Barr's leadership was conducting a probe into possible connections between Netanyahu's close associates and Qatar. Ronan Bar and the Prime Minister had been at odds over security failures surrounding the October the 7th Hamas attack. Barr claimed the move to oust him was retaliation for his refusal to target anti-government protesters and his opposition to shielding Netanyahu from his ongoing corruption trial. The cabinet voted to dismiss Barr in March, sparking mass protests and multiple legal petitions. The High Court halted the dismissal at the time, pending a full hearing. Although Barr later announced he would step down, the Supreme Court moved forward with its ruling, citing grave irregularities in the dismissal process. In response, Attorney General Gali Barev Miera has now barred Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from appointing a new Shin Bet chief, stating that he must refrain from any involvement until legal guidelines are put in place to guarantee the integrity of the appointment process. Staying in the Middle East once again, the Israeli military says it intercepted a missile launched from Yemen earlier today in what appears to be the latest attack linked to Yemen's Houthis. The missile triggered sirens across several areas in central Israel. Authorities have confirmed that the missile was successfully intercepted and there were no immediate reports of casualties or damage. The Houthis have not claimed responsibility for this, however. The group has repeatedly targeted Israel with missiles and drones since the start of the Israel-Hamas war in October 2023. The Houthis say their attacks are in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. A serious accident disrupted a North Korean warship launch ceremony on Wednesday, with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un watching. State media confirms Kim called the incident a criminal act caused by absolute carelessness. The launch of the new 5,000-ton destroyer in the eastern port of Chongjin ended in disaster. According to the KCNA, the warship's bottom was crushed, throwing the vessel off balance. South Korea's military says the ship is now lying sideways in the water. Kim criticized the failure, saying it had collapsed the dignity of the state. He blamed inexperienced command and unscientific methods. The leader vowed those responsible would face consequences at next month's Party Central Committee meeting. This marks a rare public admission of failure from Pyongyang. Kim ordered the destroyer's immediate restoration, and he stressed that the issue was political, not just technical. Analysts say the launch method may have caused the mishap. No casualties have been reported till now. Here's what the state media has said.
과정에 미숙한 지휘와 조작상 보조위로 인하여 대차 이동의 평행성을 보장하지 못한 결과 한미 부분의 진수 썰매가 먼저 리탈되어 좌주되고 일부 구간의 선조 파공으로 함의 균형이 파괴되었으며 함수 부분이 손대서 리탈되지 못하는 엄중한 사고가 발생했습니다. 김정은 동지께서는 사고 전 과정을 지켜보시고 이것은 순수 부주의와 무책임성, 비과학적인 경험주의에 인해 산생된 도저히 있을 수도 없고 도저히 용납할 수도 없는 심각한 중대 사고이며 범죄적 행위로 된다고 엄중한 평가를 내리.
South Korea's military has also commented, saying that the North Korean warship is now lying sideways in the water. South Korea and US intelligence agencies have been monitoring the vessel's movements. Here's what South Korea's defense ministry said.
보당국은 북한 청지랑의 대형 함정 진수 동향을 사전에 추적 감시하고 있었으며 측면 진수가 실패했다고 평가합니다. 과거에도 북한은 군사 정찰 위성이 실패했다든지 하는 상황을 먼저 공개한 적이 있습니다. 그런 측면 진수 방식은 현재 우리 군은 사용하고 있지 않습니다.
Now let's once again turn to North America, where Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada is in high-level talks with the US about joining the proposed Golden Dome missile defense system. The Golden Dome, unveiled by President Donald Trump on Tuesday, aims to counter advanced missile threats, including hypersonic and space-launched weapons. Trump says the system will be operational before his term ends. Its initial price tag is $25 billion. But total costs could reach around $540 billion. Canada's role is unclear, however, but Carney confirmed that discussions are underway, but avoided details on cost or commitment, saying military decisions would be evaluated very carefully. We can choose to invest and partner, Carney told reporters, adding that the decision isn't one to negotiate like a contract. The Golden Dome would be built on NORAD, the US-Canada Defense Alliance, since 1958. NORAD already tracks missiles and coordinates defense over North America. Trump said Canada wants protection and should pay its fair share if it joins. He framed US involvement as support for an ally. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you for joining us.